Welcome. While everybody is joining, we're going to go ahead and get started with a poll. So we'll give everyone a moment to join and answer the poll question. Answers coming through. We'll just give it another moment while everybody has a chance to join and answer the poll. All right, looks like most people have had a chance to answer. So we will share the results here. And our panelists are going to address those results in just a bit. But to begin, welcome and thank you for joining RSI Security and Trustify today for our webinar on how to prepare your business for the future of data privacy. We're going to cover how to navigate the current and upcoming data privacy landscape to remain compliant and discuss software solutions that will facilitate your compliance. So let me tell you a little bit about your host organizations. Trustify is a cybersecurity firm featuring solutions delivered on a software as a service platform. Trustify leads the market with the easiest to use and deploy email security products, providing both inbound and outbound email security from a single vendor. The most valuable asset to any organization other than its employees is the data contained in their email. And Trustify's key objective is keeping clients' data, reputation, and brand safe from all threats related to email. With Trustify's inbound shield, data loss prevention, and email encryption, clients are always one step ahead of the attackers. RSI Security is a premier managed IT security and compliance advisory service provider. We have professionals for all cybersecurity and compliance needs, from CCPA and GDPR to PCI, healthcare data compliance, cyber defense, federal government programs, and more. These are just some of the services and solutions that we provide. We work with some of the world's leading companies, institutions, and governments to ensure the safety of their information and their compliance with applicable regulations. Before I pass it off to our presenters, I just want to go over a couple FAQs. First, any questions that you have throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to use the Q&A button to submit all of your questions throughout. Also, you will receive this presentation, the slides, and your CPE certificate via email tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Now I will pass it off to our panelists to introduce themselves and get us started. Rome, would you like to start us off and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you very much. So again, thank you for having me. My name is Rome Handler. I'm the CEO of Trustify. Prior to Trustify, I spent more than 15 years with Las Vegas Sands, based out of Las Vegas. Las Vegas Sands is, for the one of you that don't know, probably the biggest what we call integrated resort company in the world, owned the Venetian Palazzo in Las Vegas that they just announced the sales of it, on casinos in Macau, in Singapore, used to own also a casino in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And I was their chief marketing officer, chief information officer, chief administration officer. Dealt a lot with technology, with compliance, again, coming from a very regulated environment. In the past years, other than Trustify, I dealt a lot with venture capital, with technology, all kind of things around innovation. And I'm based both in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and in Las Vegas.
All right. And hi, everybody. This is Zach Schwartz. I am the VP of Business Development here at Trustify. I've been with Trustify for the last 4 years, since our incorporation date in 2017. My roles incorporate both end users as well as our partnership enablement, helping our clients create robust data loss prevention strategies and keeping their data safe. I've been in the technology space for the last 15 years, all within data security.
Thank you, Zach. So hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Frederick, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm currently a security associate at RSI Security with a background in various compliance frameworks and IT systems. My main focus at RSI has been a member of the technical services team, where I've performed services for PCI, CIS, various other compliance engagements as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Mohan Shamachar. I'm the Director of Security and Compliance at RSI Security. And so I work with Nicole, Peter, and everybody in ensuring that our clients go through the assessment and compliance programs for various regulatory frameworks, including privacy.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Peter Fanoff, and yes, I am a senior security and privacy advisor for RSI Security, and heavily involved in many GDPR and CCPA audits and compliance efforts with several companies throughout the United States.
Okay, I think that does it for our introductions. So first up, I wanted to start our webinar off with our introductory poll. Do you think your company is prepared for the future state of data privacy? So we got a couple of mixed results there. If you could, Eileen, bring up those results, please. So over halfway prepared was our majority, 47% of you said that. So typically, I think if everybody in our team wants to speak about this, the biggest obstacle to data privacy is mapping where that information is. Protecting the sensitive information starts with knowing where it's at, and it can be quite the task for a lot of organizations, and often requires many hours, dedicated personnel on how to understand how data is collected, if the data is even sensitive in nature, how the data flows through a system, retention schedules, and even the end of life cycle with destruction and such. So Peter, if you wouldn't mind speaking to maybe some of the largest obstacles that you've come across to preparing for data privacy.
Absolutely, sure. I think there's a couple of areas, and I think one of the key ones, as you touched on, is really the data mapping. What we've found in the audits that we've had is that data mapping is probably the most time-consuming, and probably the one that, at the end of the day, really is one of the most important ones, because what you have to understand is, first you have to define what PII is, and what are the various information attributes that you have to uncover and where they are. And so the mapping not only includes identifying the types of PII that you have, but also what their uses are. I mean, you have to sort of map the use case to the data that you're collecting to support that use case. And while you're doing that, you also have to understand what's the retention time, the minimum amount of time that you can hold on to. Because at the end of the day, almost all of the frameworks for privacy are basically oriented around the fact that you've only got to retain this for the minimal amount of time possible to accomplish the objective. Now, they don't ever decide what that time frame is for retention. That's up to the individual companies. And as long as you can justify the retention period, you're fine. But again, the retention period has to be justified, and should document the reasons why you plan on holding that, whether it be for tax purposes, 7 years plus 1, or whatever it may be. I think the other really difficult process is understanding where it all is. Many applications have data stores. Data flows from one application to another. Some of it may be archived, some of it may be active storage. And really, a lot of that effort is understanding where and how it's stored, what the retrievability of it is. And those are some of the largest efforts we found. The other second largest effort is policies, whether it be the external privacy policies and the mechanisms by which you let the consumer know what that collection is for and how it's going to be used. But in addition to that, the processes in supporting the consumer rights, the ability to, process a request. In many cases, the frameworks require that you have at least two methods, whether it be through a call center or through an email, that those requests can be then processed. And there's a time limit in which you have to respond. So building those back office processes and the ability to make sure that they're executed within the time frame that's allocated by the framework is another important task. And we find a lot of companies really aren't prepared for that. So Nicole, I think those are the kind of the things that I would say are the most important and are probably the largest efforts to deal with.
Okay, impressive. So Mohan, would you like to add anything or maybe speak to how maybe a data privacy or data protection officer through their roles and responsibilities could help an organization overcome some of these hurdles?
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, so first of all, a quick clarification on the DPO and the role within a company. So yes, there is an official, when it comes to GDPR, there is an official DPO, Data Protection Officer role. And unofficially, whether it's GDPR or non-GDPR, we are talking about a role within an organization that is responsible for compliance and for privacy. So when it comes to the DPO itself, there are certain criteria whether you need a DPO or not. Most likely you don't. You have to be performing data transactions in a large scale, or you should have a higher impact, and there is a higher threshold that it's requiring a DPO. But so we're talking about an officer's requirement within an organization. An officer has, pretty much is a liaison and helps you identifying what you need to be doing and how you want to be protecting the data, and perform a data mapping and help you perform the data mapping, and also perform other processes such as data IA, impact assessment, risk assessment, understanding, understanding your business processes and scoping out and so on. So it's a broad role where the compliance officer or the protection officer can work with the IT teams and the security teams and the senior management. And then ultimately, the protection officer will be reporting to the senior management with the compliance reports and compliance status and so on. So the screen that you're seeing here is, how each country treats. In general, for GDPR, when it comes to Europe, there is a higher threshold in terms of data protection, requiring a data protection officer. But our recommendations are you have a dedicated officer within your company who liaises with the senior management and the security team and the IT operations team to get your organization towards privacy compliance.
Those are some great points, Mohan. Yeah, a DPO is not necessarily required, and a lot of privacy frameworks definitely have different titles for a dedicated protection officer, which kind of leads me into our next question for Mohan or Rome. What international regions do you see with the strictest data privacy laws?
Mohan, you want to take it? Or?
So yeah, I can address a little bit of that, Rome. Thank you. At the moment, it depends on what kind of data. Not all data is the same. So the privacy itself depends on what kind of data. whether it's a US state such as California or GDPR or UK. If you take these three, just compare them, every data protection law defines the personal data differently. They're not the same. What California considers as sensitive data may not be sensitive data in another law. So that's the problem that we have. A very, very fragmented set of laws everywhere to define what personal data is. So the complexity and the complexity of requirements and the strictness of the law itself depends on what kind of data you have. So it's not one hammer, one size fits all. So for example, if you take UK has the largest single medical database in the world. Why? Because of their national single national system that they have. And they emphasize that you de-identify the data. So that's where the complexity over there is. And then when it comes to GDPR, whether it's political information, whether it is gender information, geolocation, everything becomes sensitive data. And so in terms of which country has the strictest law, the answer is really depends. So at the moment we see GDPR as the most strictest privacy law that we have seen so far in terms of implementation and compliance. And then with the United States, currently we have CCPA and Virginia. Virginia goes a little bit broader in terms of sensitive data compared to California. And then we have other states that are coming up, which are heavy on security requirements, more than the data definition itself. So it really depends on who you're talking to when it comes to identifying, okay, which law is the strictest. Rome?
Yeah, I would concur. I just think that in general, GDPR, again, without looking into specific data, GDPR is considered to be the gold standard. And you see other jurisdictions around the world tend to refer to GDPR and then maybe tweak it to their needs. But I would say PCI would used to be the gold standard for credit card information. GDPR is probably the gold standard for data privacy.
Okay, so we've touched base on some global privacy requirements and a little bit on the state side as well in the US. So Peter, can you go a little bit more in depth on the US states and just kind of give us a little overview over new state requirements that are coming out based on CCPA or just emerging trends?
Sure, be glad to. If you'd bring up the slides on that. So as you can see in the United States, currently there's really California and Virginia who have actually passed laws related to data privacy. And of course, California, the first go around of that was the CCPA. The last referendum that they had during the last voting period, they actually passed Proposition 24, which then sort of took the CCPA to the next level, and now they call it the CPRA, which goes into effect in 2023. Now that's going to probably be amended along the way. And it's interesting to note that the origins of CCPA was California is the only state that I know of where an individual person can actually get a law on the ballot. And they do that by collecting enough signatures. And so that's actually how the first go around with CCPA was initiated. It was an individual by the name of Alistair McAllister who decided that Google had way too much information on him. And he thought that they should probably do something about it. So he got enough signatures to put it on the ballot. And that was the origins of CCPA. CCPA got watered down over the course of time. So Alistair McAllister was not happy about that. So Alistair went out and got a ton more signatures and got the current Proposition 24 back on the ballot with a little bit more GDPR-like capabilities. And so now we have CPRA in that arena. And of course, Virginia recently just passed their Consumer Data Protection Act, and we'll get into a little bit more about what that covers and some of the other areas that where the states are starting to move on privacy. The map is always a great visual. There's an awful lot of activity. And, you know, in all my audits, the one common complaint that I have from the companies that I deal with is that this is getting out of hand, that it's almost impossible to be compliant with so many states, you know, coming to the forefront here with legislation, and all of it's a little bit different. So there's no uniformity to that. And, you know, the map, you know, kind of gives you a quick visual, but if you go to the next slide, we'll start getting into some of the details around, you know, what's happened. So this is a fairly recent, I think it is the beginning of May. This is the latest status. And so, you know, we have, you know, broken it down into different categories of the legislation that's been passed, which ones are actively, you know, going through the mill within their state legislatures. And, you know, obviously Virginia was passed and became the second state next to California. And in fact, a lot of what Virginia has is actually patterned after the CCPA. But this bill's going through Alaska, Colorado, Connecticut, Nevada, New Jersey. And if you look at the next slide, I think that even that continues a little bit more, where, you know, we have Alabama and Illinois and Massachusetts, you know, and Minnesota and New York. So you can see this is getting to be quite the thing here. And, you know, some of them have fallen off the cliff. So the dead bills, Arizona, you know, defeated theirs, Florida defeated theirs, Kentucky, North Dakota, and Oklahoma. So those, you know, sort of died on the vine. But you can understand from a business perspective, if all of these bills, even half of the ones that are being introduced, pass, and the fact that all of these are slightly different, what a nightmare that's going to be for, you know, businesses to comply with. And so there's been a hue and cry. I think the top 100 CEOs of the largest businesses in the United States have all signed, you know, a letter to the federal government, basically indicating that this is something that they feel the federal government needs to step in. And, you know, with that, I think if I go to the next slide, we can look at some of the legislation that the federal government has proposed. So Eileen, if you wouldn't mind, or Nicole, just advancing. Here we go. So in typical government fashion, even the federal government, you know, we have the Republicans, we have the Democrats, we have the independents, and, you know, any senator can introduce whatever bill they want. I've picked one, but there are actually three that have been introduced at the federal level. And it's going to be kind of interesting to see, because currently with all three branches of the government controlled by the Democrats, they're going to much favor a more heavily consumer-focused bill. But with 2022 coming around and potential for the House to change hands, then you can see what the Republicans are less, you know, oriented towards having the federal government in your business. And so, you know, you can see that there's going to be some potential impact. But at the end of the day, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the federal government will introduce legislation. And while it will probably serve as the floor in terms of the requirements that the states have to meet, that doesn't mean the states can't add to that. And so we'll still have some aspect of that that's going to be a problem. But in any case, if you're not getting ready to deal with privacy at this point in time, you should be, because it's just not California anymore. And it will soon be the federal government. And when it's the federal government, it's going to cover every business that's out there. And of course, yes, you know, who does it apply to? As you can see from the slide, they're going to probably take it pretty easy on the small businesses out there. And that's the right thing to do, because small businesses, in order to comply with this, you know, that's a significant expense. And yes, in many cases, they can't afford it. But nonetheless, there will be legislation that will impact all businesses across the US probably within the next, at least by 2022. So if we move on from this slide, we can see again some of the obligations that it will impose on businesses, and we can see that there'll be penalties associated with this. Not as significant as the penalties that are being applied by the GDPR, but nonetheless, they'll have some teeth in it. And even to the extent that the new California legislation, what it did was it opened up a dedicated branch that is going to be enforcing privacy legislation. Before, it was the Attorney General of the state of California, and there weren't that many, they didn't really single out too many companies for fines, although there were a few. But with the new legislation, they'll have a dedicated branch that will be prosecuting individuals. So you can obviously see the fact that that's going to, prosecutions will increase. And again, at the federal level, I'm sure that will be the same as well. And so, penalties are going to make it, painful if you're not ready to do this.
That's awesome. That's very interesting, Peter, especially the developments in both on the state and federal levels. My next question kind of ties into all of this for both Ram and Zach. How has these new developments, the federal level, the CCPA changes, even internationally, how has that affected your clients and your solution specifically?
I can take that, Rome. So really what we're seeing is across the board, we're having our executive teams, our DPOs and security teams trying to figure out how to balance that happy medium between locking down data, but then also giving users the ability to continue to do their day-to-day business. So what we've seen is rolling out new sorts of technology that allows users to keep their data, say, in an encrypted fashion, or in a secure fashion where they're still able to have access, but be able to stay fully compliant. So I think most of the conversations that we're having, they see what's happened in, say, in Europe with GDPR, and are starting to see that this is something that is going to come across the US. So we see lots of our clients getting ready as they're working with states like California, but also being very mindful of how to roll this out in a way that is not going to affect their business while still staying compliant.
Interesting. Okay. So this is a question for everybody. Based on all of that information, what kind of trends in various sectors do you see? What verticals are most heavily regulated and should find maybe both technical and non-technical solutions for future privacy laws that are on the board?
Let me take that one first. So I just read a recent article where, cyber thieves, at one point in time, their number one target was credit cards. And of course, that's why we have PCI today. But currently, from what I understand, there's a valuation on health data that is probably 3 or 4 times the value of what a credit card will bring on the black market. And I'd like to throw that out to the rest of the panel to discuss is, what do you else see other than the fact that the cyber thieves are now going after healthcare data? And why do you think that there's a premium on that?
So I'll take this. In general, I think that going back to Nicole's question, you see different needs for different sector and different vertical. We design Trustify in mind, like Zach was saying, that we want to enhance security, but also improve productivity. So most security tool, it's like everything else in life. If you want to put more locks and fences, it will be more difficult to get into your house, but it's also going to be more difficult to get out of your house. But you still need to come in and out of your house. So how do you balance having security and at the same time also having allowing you to keep on doing productivity? So Trustify designed the system in a way that it's very, very agile, flexible, easy to deploy, manage, and use. And by doing so, what happened is that we have security feature that our user are using in a way that they use it for productivity reason. And the same time, it's enhanced the security of their organization. Now, back to your question is what we designed something called one-click compliance. So depends on your vertical, we have all those different CCPA, GDPR, PCI, and anything else that might happen in your jurisdiction, in your specific industry. So we do some work in gaming industry. Today we had a call with a customer in a gaming company, but in Indian reservation. So they have some restrictions and some regulations that are different than even the state that they're in. So our system is such that it allows you very quickly to just click on what are the things that are most important for you and protect those things. Now we see, yes, we see that it's vary. So depending on your organization, some people need to understand they send a lot of personal information about their employees. So it can be like W-2s and even some health information, definitely healthcare, people that has a lot of information around medical, they follow HIPAA. PCI, everybody has PCI. So you see it across the board that it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It's the compliance part of it, but today what is happening is that we offer outbound encryption. So really, we allow you to use in your technology ability to, if you want to block information, if you want to let it go through and and encrypt it. And what we see is the organization are looking not only at compliance, but at security at the same time. So the two are kind of merging together because you need to comply because of regulatory requirement, but you need to be secure because you want to protect your customer data, your company data, your IP, and you also want to protect your infrastructure for people that are sitting out there either compromising your infrastructure and really get into it, or sit outside and just listening to the data that you're sending them. So what we see, the trend is the two are merging together.
Yeah, and then just to bring that back to Peter's question around why healthcare data is so valuable. It's one of the things that, as Ron was saying, we have the ability to encrypt or block that data. But in the conversations that we've been having, what's happening, why that data has become so valuable, is cyber criminals have found that with that healthcare data, what they're able to really do is commit insurance fraud. So creating insurance fraud on behalf of those users. So it becomes something not just stealing a credit card for that financial gain, but really creating an entire new identity for a person, creating a claim and then bringing that back. So it's something that all of our clients are very mindful of today as we're seeing these new types of attacks.
I think also in general with COVID, you just see, even obviously you look at the numbers, we showed a 6,000% increase in COVID being part of the attack or the scam. So what you see is there is much more data around health data out there, and it can be used for different reason to basically to, it's easier to use it today to get money versus just simple wiring money to a fictitious account or to a wrong account.
And another point to bring up is, yes, you want to protect the data to prevent from fraud and data breaches in that regard, but there are other issues with non-compliance that are both related to the regulation itself and also the impact to consumers. So in that vein of questioning, if both Trustify and RSI would like to speak to some of the consequences of non-compliance from both the regulatory perspective and then also the customer base and organizational perspective.
Well,
I mean,
go
sorry,
ahead.
you go for it. No, I was just going to say some of the things that we've seen. I mean, it varies between different compliance law. Probably the strictest are going to be some of those HIPAA violations that you see that can exceed into the millions of dollars. We're seeing, as I think the slide that was about to be brought up with GDPR, entire teams out there where they are going through and looking for these different breaches or lack of compliance. So there are very heavy fines that are associated with it. But Peter, if you want to get into the actual numbers.
Yeah, in fact, one of the interesting things, obviously GDPR has the highest in terms of fines. In fact, they categorize the fines by whether it's a severe infringement or a less severe. A less severe infringement could be up to 10 million euros, or 2% of the firm's worldwide annual revenue, whichever amount is higher. So when you're looking at 2% of your worldwide revenue or a 10 million euro fine, that's pretty steep. And that's for the less severe infractions. If you look at the more serious infractions, they can go up to 20 million euros or 4% of the firm's worldwide annual revenue from the preceding fiscal year, whichever is greater. So there's some serious teeth involved with GDPR. But it's interesting because what we're also seeing is that the member states of the European Union who find that there are violations within their state are using this as a revenue opportunity to fatten the coffers of the states, call it a privacy penalty tax, if you will. And so they are looking at this and saying, with those kinds of numbers, they can really increase their state revenue. And so they're very aggressively pursuing violations within the European Union because they look at it as an incentive. And so, it's very critical, particularly if you're serving that market segment, that you're in full compliance with this, or you're looking at some serious penalties there.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting about GDPR, as opposed to say HIPAA, where if you have a breach, it's post-breach where you'll have your fines. With GDPR, there's actually officers out there who are proactively searching for this lack of compliance in order to really increase that tax revenue, as you stated. So it's pretty interesting how they're doing it.
That's a great point, Zach. Yes, so I can speak a little bit about HIPAA to GDPR. HIPAA is all post-breach. Until the breach is identified and complained, there is no penalty. But of course, even within the HIPAA, it really depends. What is the type of violation? How many violations? How many users? How many records? What have you done so far? Have you made any corrections? So it really, the OCR and the Office of Civil Rights enforces HIPAA, and it can go anywhere from $100 per violation to multiple 1.5 or $2.5 million per violation. So we're talking about post-breach and pre-breach analysis, just like Zach mentioned.
So, Zach, next question's for you. How can Trustify help you avoid these fines and a loss in reputation and loss of data, all of the consequences of losing this sensitive information?
Sure. So we've kind of touched on it a little bit over the course of the conversation. But one of the things, or really what Trustify does and what we focus on, is data classification. So mapping that data and then data loss prevention. So giving our users the ability, as you see on the screen, with a single click in order to protect all of our outbound email, which is the #1 way that we see data being disseminated today. But being able to protect that in a non-binary way. So legacy systems, traditionally, it was either we are going to block this data from leaving, or we're going to allow it to pass through and essentially have a compliance risk. With Trustify, what we've done is given users the ability to still have that productivity, so still be able to disseminate data, but do it in a secure, encrypted fashion, which allows us to really be on the cutting edge or the leading edge of these new compliance laws coming out, while still giving that productivity ability for our users. So as you see on the screen, Trustify, full data loss prevention, data classification, email encryption component built directly on top of your existing email infrastructure. So very limited changes that you have to make, and very limited investment that has to be made in order to become compliant in regards to your email.
It's a great solution. So I missed a question that was related to our talk about privacy regulations. And I'd like to just touch base on that from Donald Callahan, I believe. His question was, does this apply to businesses located in Arizona with regards to their clientele in California? And I'm assuming, do state regulations apply to organizations that act outside of the required state but still have clientele within the state? And similarly, we could probably apply that to GDPR as well. Peter or Mohan, if you'd like to speak to that.
Mohan, why don't you take the CCPA and I'll do the GDPR.
Nicole, could you ask me the question again? Sorry.
Sure. Does CCPA apply to businesses that are located outside of the state of the requirement? So say the organization is in Arizona and has clientele in California.
Good question. So essentially, CCPA is all about protecting California residents' information. So whether basically whether you're headquartered in California or not, it doesn't matter. You could be headquartered in outside of California, but you're doing business in California, which means you are essentially collecting and using and disclosing or sharing personal information that belongs to California residents, then yes, you're subjected to CCPA.
And likewise, very similar to GDPR. I mean, you can be a US company, but if your market is the European Union, or you're in this electronic day and age, if you're allowing European citizens to utilize your services online from the European Union, then yes, GDPR applies to you as well. So it really is about where the citizen resides and the laws that are designed to protect that citizen.
Great, very concise, both of you. Thank you. So those are the end of our question session here. I'd like to take a second to just go around and take some final thoughts on the future of data privacy from each panelist's perspective. So Peter, do you want to go first?
Oh, that's a tough one. What are my thoughts on how this is going to play out? I think is without a doubt, this is going to be one of the largest efforts that businesses are going to be faced in the next couple of years. There's no doubt in my mind that this is the beginning of a tidal wave of what's going to happen for US businesses. And if you're not prepared, or you're not starting that process to get prepared, you're going to get buried by the wave.
Wow, okay. Very deep thoughts right there on the future. Mohan?
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Peter. Data protection, personal privacy is all about transparency and control of personal information. Right now, there are about 80 countries that have adopted some kind of data protection laws. In the US, at least about 17 states have defined the personal information, and they're working towards some kind of privacy law. And then, we have also heard about, some kind of a federal law coming in. And on the HIPAA side, some of the latest changes are, if you think about it, HIPAA is the first privacy law. Even before GDPR, HIPAA protecting patients' information and providing privacy rule, consent and disclosure and so on. So even in the HIPAA world, the health information exchange now has gone from state to federal, and they're working towards a trusted exchange. And then, you know, we think that the innovations around the design, you know, so many tech companies have so much of personal data now, including healthcare data. You know, many years ago, it was only hospitals, only the designated entities that used to have the healthcare data. Now, if you look at healthcare data, it's everywhere. So we're talking about innovations in de-identifying the data. So for just like UK, the emphasis will be, it's okay to have the data, but ensure that you can de-identify, you can do the research, you get the benefit of having the data, not necessarily identifying individuals or not taking steps that will impact the individuals. So the future is between the techs, the policymakers, you know, and so on. So that's where we are moving towards. And consent is a huge one. Today we have laws that, you know, that make you opt in, laws that make you opt out. So that will hopefully be uniform in the future, and so that consent is not very confusing.
Thank you, Mohan. Rome, if you could answer, what are your final thoughts on the future of data privacy?
I think that data privacy is here to stay, and it's just going to increase all the time because, you know, we just deal with more and more data, and so privacy going to become a bigger issue by the minute. And it's something that it's the right thing to do for organization to protect the data of their customer, even if it's not what is required by the regulator. And the reality is that it's going to become more and more complex. So if you, I think Peter mentioned it, in the US it will become federal law. Otherwise it's basically a mess. You can't do business. Back to the question before about California, I'm based here, I'm based there. The rules change from state to state, very difficult to manage. But when you are starting doing international business and having customer in many different locations, you need to have tools in place to make sure that everything is protected. And that's where technology gonna take a major part of this effort, and to really help you comply and protect your organization data and your customer data.
Thank you, Rome. Zach, what about your final thoughts on the future of data privacy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all the points made by the panelists. I believe we are definitely going to see some uniformity within the US as this gets rolled out within this administration over the next couple of years. And also, I mean, I think it's a good thing. The data that is being stored is clearly very valuable to cyber criminals when organizations are left to their own devices and can leave vulnerability points open. We've seen the attacks that can happen. So I think it's something that as it starts to get forced from a regulatory standpoint, getting everyone to a place of security is going to be extremely important. And we're absolutely going to see that over the next couple of years.
All very valid points. So I would like to transition into our Q&A session. I know we're reaching the end of this webinar. So before we get into the Q&A, just a quick reminder, if you haven't submitted your questions yet, please do so now in the Q&A. I see a couple of questions rolling in. Also check your email tomorrow for an email with your CPE certificate, this presentation deck, and some other resources as well. So going into questions from our audience, Nick Marcinato, I apologize if I'm butchering somebody's name. Going back to the very first survey, I was wondering what makes companies, organizations feel completely prepared to the challenges posed by the current scenarios?
That one.
I will take this one.
Rome first. Yes.
I would say delusion, because because I think that and I don't want to offend anybody in the audience, but I just don't see how somebody can be completely, like, even if you have all the system in place, all the security, the cyber security, and let's assume you bought every single product out there in the market. There is a world, huge world out there of people that the only thing they try to do is to hack your system and find more stuff. and and yes, you can be ready from a privacy perspective as long as you follow the regulators. So if you refer just to being ready from a compliance perspective, there, yes, you can be, if you have the right system. And again, if you encrypt the data coming in and some coming going out of your organization, sometimes even coming into the organization, if you encrypt the data that you have stored in your system, um, then you definitely going to be in a category that you feel that you are complying. But if you think that how secure you are, we say there are only three types of organization that been hacked to, organization that will be hacked to, an organization that been hacked to, but they just don't know that they've been hacked. So, it's and really that's the reality of the world we are living in right
Peter, you had some comments. Do you have anything to add to Rome's?
No, I think the fact of the matter is that you can never do too much, right? And I think that reinforces what Rom's saying, is that you really do need to look heavily at, how are you protecting that data, and what kind of defenses you have in place. But at the end of the day, it's, yes, you can make it very difficult, not impenetrable, but yes, you should do the very best you can to hold them at bay.
Well, a follow-up question. Oh, Mohan, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll take a little bit of an organizational approach here. Ask yourself, it's all about risk management. Are you performing privacy risk management? Have you reduced the risk? Do you see the risk? Do you know your data? Do you know your processes? Have you done the data mapping? First of all, have you put in a governance? If your senior management has put a governance in place, if there's a compliance officer, and the compliance officer says, yeah, I have reviewed everything, we are compliant, or I can assure, there's an assurance that of compliance, then that would be the time you can say you're prepared, because somebody is taking the accountability.
Okay, follow-up question with all of that, from the organizational perspective as well as the privacy perspective, how do you balance the security while also functionally operating your business?
So again, I think in general, it's a huge internal fight in the organization. Normally, the security and the compliance officer tend to win because they have fear and concern on their side. So so if you go to senior management and say, oh, I'm in marketing and I want to do all this stuff, and you're the compliance person, say those are the kind of fees, those are the kind of fines we're going to get, or those are the kind of PR we are exposed to, or lawsuits and liability and so on and so forth. So most of the time resources go that way. That said, at the end of the day, if it's swing too much to one side versus the other, eventually the organization cannot function. So it's very, very important to think about what is your ROI and what is the risk and return. How can you offer a reasonable level of security and compliance while still allowed to do the business? Because if you cannot conduct your business, why do you even have a compliance officer? Because you're going to be out of business. But compliance officers don't always think this way, because they're very focused on their world, their role in that specific organization, which is to comply.
I'd like to also add to that, and I think it dovetails to what Mohan had just said about risk. I actually heard yesterday that the insurance companies are going to stop insuring against these ransomware losses. because it's just really getting too much. And I think many companies, when they did their risk analysis, they used or they factored in the fact that the insurance is going to cover some of this. And now that the insurance company are seeing that this is getting, much more frequently than they anticipated, they're going to move out of that business, which then says that the company is now fully responsible for, paying out whatever it is if they choose to do so. Or if they don't choose to do so, they better be very prepared to be able to bring their business back online as quickly as possible, which means that their security posture and the way in which they can recover has to be really tight and very efficient, so that they're not spent months or even weeks, trying to bring the business back because they forgot to archive or back up, key systems. So, the risk level is going to shift from the insurance companies back to businesses, and hopefully businesses will realize that really changes the amount of money and effort that they put into security internally.
So I can add a quick comment on that. There is no privacy without security. So yes, so focus on your privacy, compliance needs, and minimize the data, de-identify the data. Focus on ensuring that you reduce the risk, and then build security around it. So I would say, that's the balancing approach you can follow. And there are frameworks, great frameworks that provide, that help you with security. SOC 2, High Trust is a fantastic framework that provides you an overall security standards that includes security for privacy and so on. So yes, security should not be an afterthought, but it's definitely risk-based, based on what's critical, what you're trying to protect, what your compliance policies are, and how much. There's no single set of security framework that's associated with privacy, but it's all about how you want to reduce the risk and what is the reasonable security you can provide around personal data.
I would just add one thing on security, back to, piggybacking on what Mohan was saying. You need to, when you choose a security vendor, you want to make sure, especially today with the new technology and new type of architecture, you need to make sure that the security tool provide your organization a lot of flexibility. Because what happened is, in the past, security used to be binary. It was yes or no. I block, I open. I let stuff come in or I don't let stuff come in. And what it does, it really prevents you from doing your work in a general way. So you need to find tools that can allow you to adapt your security needs to the individual in the organization versus one rule fits all.
They're all valid points that you've brought up. And I believe that is the end of our questions. If anybody has any final questions for our panelists, please feel free to ask them.
I don't see anything coming in. We'll give it a second, but thank you all so much to all of our panelists and Nicole for moderating. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be following up tomorrow via email, and you'll be sent this presentation and your CPE certificate. All right. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.